First of all, I want to join and thank the traditional owners for the welcome and acknowledge that they've never ceded sovereignty over this country, the land that we meet on. And I really hope that if we can keep up the pressure in Canberra, and especially pressure on Tony Abbott, that we're going to get a chance in the next year or so to formally go some way to righting one of the biggest wrongs in this country, and that is formally recognise our first Australians in the Constitution. Now, I've got a bill in Parliament that would once and for all remove discrimination from the Marriage Act and give everyone... Over the last couple of months, there's been an inquiry into that bill, and that inquiry has heard from a range of views. And during the course of the inquiry, we heard from some of the bigger churches, and I must say I want to take my hat off to those churches and religious organisations who came along and said that if you really believe in compassion and you really believe in a higher power, then that higher power would no doubt want every one of us to have the same rights. But we did hear from some others, and we did hear from so-called family associations who, I tell you what, probably don't represent most of the families in this country, but nonetheless would want to speak on behalf of them. One of the things that they said as they came up to us is that we oppose this bill because marriage is a lifelong commitment between a man and a woman. And there I was with my lawyer's brain thinking, I've got you. Well, that would mean that you're against divorce as well, wouldn't it? To my surprise, they said yes. They said the right set in when back in the 1970s we allowed people to divorce. And I think that shows one strand of the argument against equal marriage comes from the kind of place where, well, if we never changed the definition of marriage, well, men would still be able to tell women what to do and demand sexual favours from them. Men would still own women's property, and marriages between mixed races would still be outlawed in some countries. And we have moved on from that because we understand that as a society we evolve, and as a society we get closer and closer to making equality a fact of life. And to say there's a traditional definition of marriage is absolutely no answer, because unless you want to take us back to the 18th century where races were unequal and men could tell women what to do, you have to accept that time has moved on and that we believe in equality right across the board now. That marriage... What I think is even more disturbing is when you press some of these arguments, you find that it's not actually an argument against gays and lesbians and same-sex attracted people marrying. It's not against that. It's actually often an argument against gays and lesbians themselves. It is people saying that we do not believe, when they say it should be between a man and a woman, that is because they are saying that there is a lesser status if you are not in a heterosexual relationship. And that is one of the reasons why this reform is so important, because until we get this reform, Parliament is saying to the rest of the country that there are still two classes of people in Australia, and that if your sexuality isn't heterosexual, well, you're a second-class citizen. And that is why we need to change the law. And it's not just for every one of you who wants the same rights as every other citizen, but when we know that suicide is 4 times higher amongst same-sex attracted people, when we know what the mental health costs are and what it means for someone to have to live in fear and because they can't express their love for the person that they love, that affects every one of us. And it affects not just the person who wants to get married, but it affects the boy in the country town who's working out who he's attracted to, or the girl that I met here last year who wants to take her partner to the social. And that is why we need to change this law, to send a message right across the whole of the country that all love is equal. The good news, as you've heard, is that my bill got more people responding to it through the inquiry, more than 250,000 people, than any other House of Representatives inquiry that we've had, and 64% of the population who responded said, yes, it's time for a change. And that's because they know it's the right thing, and also because I think if you ask anyone in Australia at the moment, well, 64%, they are very relaxed about people who they know live in the same street as them or who work in the same workplace as them marrying the person they love. They are very relaxed about people like Rod and Jess, who I met at Richmond markets this morning with their young son in a Richmond Guernsey who they were on the way to take him to Auskick. They know that at the end of the day, especially in a world that we have at the moment, the most important thing is love. And we should not be saying love needs to be hidden. We should be saying love is a force for good, and we need to celebrate it right across the board. Someone who has obviously listened to people like Rod and Jeff is President Obama, who has come out and said, after talking with people and looking at the staff that I work with and talking to others, I know that it's time for a change. And I say, if it's good enough for the leader of the free world, it's good enough for the leaders of our political parties here in Australia. And we know, as we've heard, that although Labor Party, as a result of some great campaigning from people like you, has changed its position, unfortunately, we have the Prime Minister who is holding him back. And that poses us a bit of a problem, because it means in order to get this legislation through Parliament now, we are going to need support from the Conservatives and the likes of Tony Abbott. Now, Tony Abbott comes out and says, so we're going to need the support from Tony Abbott and from the coalition members. And I know, because I've spoken to them, that there are members in the coalition who want to vote in support of my bill. Now, when Tony Abbott gets up and says, I'm not going to support this because I believe marriage is between a man and a woman, was a simple answer, Tony. If you don't support gay marriage, don't marry a bloke. It won't become compulsory if the law passes. It will just mean that every citizen in Australia has the same right. And so we're going to keep fighting this year. I want your help to get every member of Parliament to have a conscience vote and to try and get it up. But one of the things that we've learned from the places like Canada is that after they pass the laws, and as we're seeing in the United States, at a state level, they pass laws and change the law. And in Canada, eventually the federal government decided, well, if all the states are doing it, we should get on board as well. And that's why I'm really thrilled to announce that in the next couple of weeks, Sue Pennicue, our MLC, will be introducing into Victorian Parliament a bill to remove discrimination from the Marriage Act. And we've got a by-election coming up in Melbourne, which is going to be another great chance to show support for marriage equality and for changing our laws. And I just want to end by saying what every one of you is doing here today is so important. It's not just important for you because you deserve the same rights as everyone else. You deserve the right to celebrate your love with your family and your friends in public, and God damn it, you deserve the right to frock up and wear tulle if that's what you want to do. But it's more than that. What you're doing here, every time you come to a rally like this, every time you sign a petition or call up your member of Parliament, you are sending a very strong message straight to that boy or girl in the country town, straight down in through the newspapers, through the media, putting it right in front of every young person and every not so young person who is struggling with the situation that they find themselves in. You are telling them that their love is equal, and you are telling them that we are going to change the laws in this country and make our society fairer and more equal, and you ought to be congratulated. Well done. Thank you.